In the 1880s, a man by the name of George Walser decided that he was going to do something very novel. He decided that he was going to establish a city. Now, that's not all that novel, but what was going to be interesting about this particular city was that it was going to boast of pure atheism. You see, there weren't going to be any people who believed in God in the city. He was going to found the city that he was going to name Liberal, Missouri, on the understanding or the idea that everyone in this city is an atheist, that there is no God, no church, no heaven, no hell, nothing of a religious nature is going to be allowed in this particular city. Liberal, Missouri today has about 779 people in it. The street names are the same as they were when George Walser started the city, from my understanding. He named the streets after famous atheists and agnostics and infidels. You will see Darwin Avenue. You will see Ingersoll Avenue, named after Robert Ingersoll and Charles Darwin. There is a Paine Street or Paine Avenue named after Thomas Paine, who wrote a caustic diatribe against the inspiration of the Bible. Well, in 1880, when he started Liberal, Missouri, there were about 300 people in the town. And what quickly emerged was that the town was filled with thieves, with liars, with drunkards, with people that you would not want to associate with on a regular basis. And a man by the name of Clark Braden went to visit Liberal, Missouri. And Clark Braden was a debater. He had involved himself in something like 120 different debates. He had delivered over 3,000 lectures or so. He spoke on the Christian principles as found in the New Testament. And he visited Liberal, Missouri, and then he wrote an article describing what was happening in the town of Liberal, Missouri. You're looking at a photocopy that Eric Lyons researched and acquired of the actual article that was posted in 1885 in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And in this article, Clark Braden proceeded to describe what was happening in Liberal. As you read it, he talks about how all of the women and men used bad language, used curse words. He said even the children cursed on a regular basis. He said habitually. He said there was an attitude of irreverence from the children to the parents. He said the hotels were like brothels. It was a place that no decent person would want to visit. And of course, he blamed that on the atheistic ideology that was the foundation of the city. Well, they sued Clark Braden very quickly for criminal libel and slander. And of course, very quickly after the situation was apprised, they realized that Clark Braden was saying exactly what was right, and the criminal investigation and court case was dropped. Clark Braden was totally exonerated of any criminal charges. But then he was sued on a civil suit for $25,000 by one of the hotel owners. And the hotel owner was trying to sue him civilly for libel and slander, but quickly when he realized what Clark Braden was going to do and the evidence that he was going to present that showed that the hotels were nothing more than brothels, the court case civilly was dropped, and the man who sued him paid all of the court cost. Clark Braden had hit the nail on the head. You see, Liberal, Missouri was a failed experiment. Oh, it wasn't a failed experiment of what would happen if you actually got a bunch of atheists together, because it showed exactly what would happen if there were a group of people, if there was a group of people that got together that really truly did believe that there was no God, and really truly believed that there is no standard for moral conduct. That's what would happen. But it was a failed experiment in that they set out to establish a town that was made up of upstanding, solid citizens of the country, and they could not do it because the foundation of their town was terminally flawed. That foundation being atheism. We need to assess the idea of atheism and the idea of Christianity in this particular lesson. And we need to see just where those two ideas would take a person if they really acted on their belief in those ideas. I want you to read a quote from a man named Bertrand Russell. At one time, Bertrand Russell was recognized as the foremost agnostic and sometimes atheistic, he swapped between the two, thinkers of his day. He wrote an article titled, "Why I'm Not a Christian." But in this particular quote, I want you to see what he says about Christianity. Now, he's not a Christian at all and would not have a place in his heart for the philosophy of Christ as found in the New Testament, but he says this. He says, Christianity, as soon as it conquered the state, put an end to the gladiatorial shows, not because they were cruel, but because they were idolatrous. The result, however, was to diminish the widespread education in cruelty by which the populace of Roman towns were degraded. Christianity also did much to soften the lot of slaves. It established charity on a large scale and inaugurated hospitals. Although the great majority of Christians failed lamentably in Christian charity, the ideal remained alive and in every age inspired some notable saints. In a new form, it passed over modern liberalism and remains the inspiration of much that is most hopeful in our somber world. Mr. Russell, do you believe that there's evidence to prove that Christianity is the truth? No, certainly not. Do you believe there's evidence to prove that God exists and that He inspired the New Testament? No, certainly not. Mr. Russell, do you believe that Christianity is the inspiration behind what is most hopeful in our somber world? Yes. Yes, I do. The truth is, friends, that if you meet a person who is applying the principles of Christianity to his or her life, then you will be meeting a person that is of such a stellar quality, such a high character, that it will be recognized even by those people who don't believe in God that the fruits of that type of philosophy are sweet. But I want to deal with some of the fruits of atheism. What would a person who truly believed that there is no God, if he or she were to act that out in his or her life, what would they do? Where would they go? What types of ideas would they accept? What types of ideas would they reject? I want you to read this particular quote by a man named William Provine. He was invited to do the keynote address at the University of Tennessee in 1998 for their annual Darwin Day, where they praise Charles Darwin and his teachings and have someone who believes in evolution to come in. He made this statement. He said, modern science directly implies that there are no inherent moral or ethical laws, no absolute guiding principles for human society. He says if you really do believe in atheism, and his term there, modern science, what he means is atheistic evolution. If you believe in atheistic evolution, then that means there are no inherently moral laws that you are bound to follow. Do you want to get rid of a child that is bugging you or that is inconveniencing you in some way? Fine, do that. There's no morally inherent law that would stop you from it. If your society voted that all of the kindergartners who couldn't read by the time they finished kindergarten needed to be disposed of, well, go ahead and do that, because there are no moral absolutes. There's nothing that would constrain you to do something or not to do something. Generally speaking, the only thing that you would use to make a decision in that case would be just vote on it. which we're going to see what happens when you go that far. But He's giving you the foundation here, and He says, if you believe in the modern scientific atheistic evolutionary idea, then there's not a single standard one by which you would need to align your life. Let's see where that goes. If we were just to analyze the sexual promiscuity that goes on in our nation alone, you would quickly see that there are all kinds of negative effects that accrue to our society because of the sexually promiscuous attitude that lots of our teens and even lots of those in their 20s and 30s and 40s have. You would quickly learn that every year 3 million teenagers, about 1 in 4 sexually active teenagers, acquire some type of a sexually transmitted disease. In 1998, you would have seen that 56% of all girls in the United States were sexually active before they were 18. Some 72% of all the boys in the United States were sexually active before they were 18. And some 19% of those who were sexually active had 4 or more consecutive partners. If I were to ask you, where could you go to justify sexual promiscuity? Could you go to the New Testament to justify the idea that you can have sex with whomever, whenever you would like to? Well, you well know, if you have read your New Testament at all, or even the Old, that the Bible repeatedly condemns such action as sinful. You would read verses like Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4, where the Bible says marriage is honorable among all and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. You would go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 starting in verse 9 and following and read that there are certain categories of people who will not inherit the kingdom of God, and those categories are the people who have chosen to do the following sins, and among those you would read licentiousness and fornication, sexual promiscuity. You could never justify that going to the New Testament. Now you would say, well, wait just a second, Kyle. Are you saying that all of the sexually active teenagers or people in the United States, that they're atheists? No, that's not what we're saying at all. Don't misunderstand the point here. The point is not that every person who is doing something like this claims not to believe in God. The point is that Christianity could never be construed to condone such. Is there a philosophy that you could go to that would justify this type of behavior? Well, there certainly is. I want you to read this quote with me. This particular statement was given by Dr. Lawrence Shaw at a meeting of the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology in 2006. Dr. Shaw said, "Before we condemn our teenagers for having sex behind the bike sheds and becoming pregnant, we should remember that this is a natural response by these girls to their rising fertility levels. Society may tut-tut about them, but their actions are part of an evolutionary process that goes back nearly 2 million years. Oh, you've got a lot of teenage girls that are getting pregnant? Oh, society, be careful about tut-tutting about them. Be careful about saying they're doing something wrong. Be careful about condemning their actions, because you know what they're doing? They're enacting their evolutionary urges. They just happen to be the product of a mindless, multi-million year chance process that brought them to where they are. So it's not that they're doing something wrong. They're just doing what evolutionarily evolved teenage Homo sapiens do. Whose fault is it? Oh, it's nobody's fault. And why even say it's something that's wrong? Because if you believe in atheistic evolution, then there are no moral absolutes. And a teenage girl sleeping with 5 boys before she gets married is just as morally acceptable as one who keeps herself pure until marriage. Continue with me A man by the name of Aldous Huxley wrote a book called A Brave New World. I read it when I was about in the 9th grade and was totally appalled by what was in it. In that particular book, he sets up a society where the government is basically in charge of the sexual lives of the citizens, and they monitor it so that an individual does not stay sexually with one individual for very long. They encouraged total sexual promiscuity. Aldous Huxley said this: I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning, and consequently assumed it had none. For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. Huxley says, you know what? If there was a God, I couldn't have sex with whoever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. So I decided up front that I just believed that there was no God. And then I looked around and found evidence to suggest to me that that would be the case, because I didn't want anybody to interfere with my sexual freedom. Do you know one of the motives behind atheistic evolution? Oh, it's not I'm following the evidence where it goes. It's, I don't want someone that I have to answer to for my behavior, especially my sexual behavior. And if I can jettison God from my mind, then I can do whatever I want to do. And the problem with that thinking is people who jettison God from their mind aren't jettisoning God from the world. Because if God exists, and He does, they're like the squirrel who is hiding his head in the hole and thinking that a person couldn't see him, all the while the Bible saying that God can see everything. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. Just not thinking about God won't stop a God from being there, will it? Well, continue with me. I don't even like to discuss this particular idea, but it needs to be discussed. Rape and evolution. Just the word sounds bad and disgusting. Certainly not something that you would talk about on a normal day-to-day basis. If we were to ask the almost absurd question, could you ever go to the New Testament and find justification for this type of activity? You would quickly understand that such could never be the case. Listening to the words of Jesus Christ, that He would say in Matthew 7 verse 12, do unto others as you would have them do to you. You would quickly see that statements found in Philippians where the Apostle Paul said, let everyone look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. And then he said, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Not to mention all of the verses that condemn this type of sexual promiscuity, the criminal behavior against your fellow human being would be condemned outright and repeatedly in the New Testament. Is there a place you could go, a philosophy that you could find that would justify this type of villainous activity against your fellow human? Yes, there is. A man by the name of Randy Thornhill and his co-worker Craig T. Palmer, co-author of a book titled A Natural History of Rape, said, evolutionary theory applies to rape as it does to other areas of human affairs on both logical and evidentiary grounds. There's no legitimate scientific reason not to apply evolutionary or ultimate hypothesis to rape. Why does rape occur? Well, because human males evolved, and that's one of the overlapping things that came along with their evolution. Read this statement that he made March 16, 2001 at a lecture that he delivered at Simon Fraser University. He said, rape is evolutionary, biological, and natural. Our male ancestors became ancestors in part because they conditionally used rape. Why are you sitting here watching or listening to this particular seminar? Well, because several years ago, maybe multi-million years ago, you had an ancestor that wanted to pass on his genes. In fact, He was, for lack of a better term, possessed by the overriding evolutionary desire to pass those genes on, and it wasn't going exactly like he wanted it to go, and so he was forced to use force to pass his genes on, and that's why you even exist today. Because your ancestors in the past conditionally perpetrated this type of villainous criminal activity on their fellow, whatever you would want to call them, fellow humans, fellow subhumans, etc. Are you starting to see where this would go? Any activity, regardless of the horrible nature, regardless of the villainous criminality of it, could be justified based on an atheistic evolutionary idea, because after all, if there's no God, in Dostoevsky's book, The Brothers Karamazov, one of his characters said, if there is no God, all things are permissible. And that's the truth. Well, how far would this go? Abortion and evolution. It is the sad state of affairs that in the United States of America today, abortion is looked at as a clinical term. The force of the overwhelming facts is that abortion is not a clinical procedure. It is a criminal activity, murderous, that involves someone that is stronger killing a weaker human being. Every single day in the United States of America, about 2,450 babies are murdered, and it's tagged abortion. Now, on September 11th, when the terrorist flew 2 planes into the Twin Towers, they killed about 2,450 people. And our president got on national and international television and was irate and said there is not a country in the world where we will not hunt these people down and make them pay for what they've done. And that very same day, we killed in our own country 2,450 of our own citizens. Now, where was the national speech? Where was the irate tirade that our president delivered to inform people that we wouldn't put up with this type of murderous activity? It was totally absent. And it was absent the day before and the day before that. And it's been absent for 30 years. And we've killed 43 million of our own citizens in the United States of America. Now, where in the world would you get an idea that you could exterminate your own citizens at your leisure? Think you could get that from the Bible? Think again. Now, what you read in the Bible is that God hates the hands that shed innocent blood. And what would be more innocent than the life of an unborn child? Well, where could you go? I think you know exactly where this is leading you. The philosophical idea of atheism. Barbara Burke wrote this statement in 1974. She said, among some animal species, infant killing appears to be a natural practice. Could it be natural for humans too? A trait inherited from our primate ancestors? Charles Darwin noted in The Descent of Man that infanticide has been, quote, probably the most important of all checks on population growth throughout most of human history, end quote. My father and brother bought a dog. It was a high-powered coon hunting dog, and they were going to sell the puppies of this dog for several $100s a piece. The dog had a litter of puppies. I believe the first time she had 12. She ate every one of them but one. Second time she had 8. She ate them all but one. If you know anything about pig farming, you understand that when a pig has several piglets, you had better get them out of the way of any boar pigs that are around, because they will eat them, and sometimes even their own mothers eat them. Do you know what 10% of the Komodo dragon's diet, the adult Komodo dragon, consists of? 10% of the adult Komodo dragon's diet is baby Komodo dragons. Well, Barbara Burke says, look, you can look out into the natural world. You can see that sometimes dogs eat their puppies, sometimes pigs eat their piglets, sometimes Komodo dragons eat their baby Komodo dragons. Look, if we're nothing more than animals and we get our urges and evolutionary senses from those lower animals, why can't we just do what the animals do? Hey, after all, Charles Darwin said there's no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. What are you? Well, if you believe in atheistic evolution, you're nothing more than a glorified monkey. And there is nothing that inherently separates you in value from the life of a roach. And if someone comes in and sprays your house to kill roaches because they're inconvenient to you because you're more powerful than a roach and you just happen to have the ability and the force to exterminate them, then if there's someone or some group of people in your society that happens to be not as convenient for you and you're strong enough and you have the ability, well, just exterminate them. You think, no, that would never take place. Nobody would buy into that idea. Think again. I want you to read the words from Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher that greatly influenced Adolf Hitler. We believe that severity, violence, slavery, danger in the street and in the heart, secrecy, stoicism, tinter's art, and devilry of every kind, that everything wicked, terrible, tyrannical, predatory, and serpentine in man serves as well for the elevation of the human species as the opposite. When you turn on your news, don't get disturbed by the fact that two individuals waited outside of Walmart and watched as a 23-year-old father of two went in and picked up some milk for his family and walked out and was shot down mercilessly just so they could get his truck. Don't be disturbed at that. Hey, all that bad stuff, in a million years, all that bad stuff is going to have worked for the elevation of human society. Oh, when you turn on your television and you see that parents are beating their children physically, some of them abusing them to the point that they are killing them, don't be disturbed about that. All of that works to the elevation of the human species. We'll look back 100,000 years and a million years from now and we'll think, well, I'm sure glad that all those kids got beaten and all those people got shot and all those women got raped and because that has elevated human society. Do you see how bitter and grotesque a society would be that actually adopted atheistic thinking? Well, liberal Missouri imploded within just a few months because it cannot maintain itself. Let me show you what happens ultimately. This man's name is one of the most infamous in all of history. Very few people will hear the name of Adolf Hitler and not understand the dastardly, villainous, murderous activity that he involved himself in. The man killed 6 million Jews, 4 million other blacks, Poles, gypsies, and other people of his own nation that he thought were expendable because they were mentally not as bright as he thought they should have been or physically not as adept as he thought they should have been. Sent them by the tens of thousands to gas chambers. Packed tiny babies by the thousands into lime-coated train cars. Did experiments on them to see how fast it would take a person to bleed to death, and he would put them a few yards away and shoot them and time how fast it would take them to bleed to death. Then he would take his prisoners and plunge them into freezing water to see how long it would take a person to die of hypothermia in freezing water. Where in the world do you think he would get justification for this type of horrible activity? You think he would ever go to the Bible and say, well, I was just following the principles that Jesus Christ laid out in His mission while He was here on this earth? I was just following the principles of the Apostle Paul that he wrote in Romans. Absolutely not. In fact, Bertrand Russell has already testified to the fact that Christianity remains the inspiration behind much that is most hopeful. And I certainly don't think anybody would describe Adolf Hitler's activities as hopeful. Where would he go? Well, I think you know very well where he would go. He says, thus there results the subjection of a number of people under the will often only of a few persons, a subjection based simply upon the right of the stronger, a right which, as we see in nature, can be regarded as the sole conceivable right because it's founded on reason. He says, if you watch in the natural world, you see the stronger lion killing the weaker gazelle. If you watch in the natural world, you see the stronger lion fighting and defeating and sometimes killing the weaker lion. He says, I'm the stronger. And I'm a product of a natural system that leads me to found my activity on one conceivable right. There's only one rule here, and you know what he says the rule is? If you're bigger and you can do it, do it. And he says my justification for that is that's how nature works. Do you know what he's right about? It is. That's how nature works. He's exactly right about that. I believe it was Alfred Lord Tennyson who wrote that nature is red in tooth and claw. And by that what he meant was, in nature, weaker things die. Slower, weaker gazelles are killed by lions. And you know what? The lion doesn't feel any compunction at all about devouring a gazelle that he killed. And Adolf Hitler says, neither do I when I kill 6 million Jews, because I'm just basing my actions on nature. What activity could you not find an animal that it does? What activity is there that there's not an animal out there somewhere that you could watch and see it do it and justify your behavior based on that? Oh, so now are we saying that anything that we see in nature we can do? Yes, that's what he's saying. Do you know what kind of society we would live in that adopted that type of bestial activity? Well, sure you do. You couldn't trust anybody. The life and death rate would be absolutely ridiculously short, because if somebody had a steak that was bigger than somebody else's and it just so happened that they were strong enough, they would walk over there and say, give me your steak. And if you protested and said, no, I'm not going to give you my steak, all the person would have to do is say, I'm bigger, beat you up or kill you and take your steak. And that's how it would be on a day-to-day basis. That, my friends, is the end result of the philosophy of atheism. Now, the evolutionist and the skeptic is quick to say, well, hold on just a second. What about all those things that have been done in the name of Christ that are bad and horrible and villainous and murderous? What about the Spanish Inquisition? What about the time when the Christians murdered their own people in the witch hunts of Salem? What about all of the... And they bring up several examples of people claiming to follow Christ and doing villainous, murderous activities. Now, I need to get this straight, and you need to understand it well. Any person who involves themselves in something like the Spanish Inquisition or the Salem witch trials was not acting on the principles that Jesus Christ laid down in the New Testament, regardless of what they said they were acting on. You can easily take the life of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and show the self-sacrifice involved and show the kind, considerate, compassionate way He interacted with people, and you can quickly see that anybody who involves themselves in such villainous activity as the Spanish Inquisition is not being like Christ. It is a twist, a perversion of the teachings of Christ. But do not misunderstand this. Atheistic evolutionary teaching leads directly, logically to a society that has no moral standards. And even the honest evolutionists admit that's the case. A man by the name of William Ernest Henley. He was a humanist. You probably don't know his name. He was angry at God for the things that God allowed in his life, and thus chose to believe that there wasn't evidence to prove that there was a God. In fact, he thought that if there was a God, the God would never have allowed the things that happened to him to have happened. See, he got tuberculosis and his leg was amputated. I believe he was 16. And then later, somehow in a freak accident, a chain hooked around his other leg and drug him down the train tracks, and tuberculosis set in again, and he thought he was going to have to amputate his other leg. He had a life of pain and suffering, and he said there can't be a God that would allow this to happen in my life. Now, we have a very good biblical, philosophical answer to the idea of pain and suffering. I don't have time to go into that right now. But I want you to listen to William Ernest Henley. He wrote a poem titled Invictus. And here's how it goes. Out of the night that covers me black as the pit, from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud under the bludgeonings of chance. My head is bloody, but unbound. Beyond this place of wrath and tears lies the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You see, William Ernest Henley wanted sincerely to believe that there was nothing other than human existence, because he hadn't lived a life that would be conducive to an eternity with God in Christ. Maybe you recall the name Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh quoted that poem as the last words that he ever spoke while he was alive on this earth. Timothy McVeigh rented a truck, filled it with hundreds of pounds of explosives, and sent it into the government building there in Oklahoma, exploded it, and called somewhere around 13 children that happened to be in a daycare in that building collateral damage. One of the greatest, and when I say greatest, what I mean is biggest acts of domestic terrorism that the United States had ever seen. And he quoted William Ernest Henley's Invictus. Why? Because he wanted you to think that he was not afraid of death. Beyond this place of wrath and tears lies but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. Do you hear that statement? He's trying to tell you he's not afraid of death. But beyond this place of wrath and tears lies but the horror of the shade. You know what is the most bitter fruit of atheism? It doesn't matter what you try to present. You are scared out of your wits to die and see what's on the other side of the shade. A young lady by the name of Dorothea Day, who was enamored with the humanistic philosophy of William Ernest Henley for several months and maybe even years, adopted this philosophy and started to believe it and to live according to it. And then she came in contact with the teachings of Jesus Christ, and she wrote a response to Henley. And it goes like this. Out of the light that dazzles me, bright as the sun from pole to pole, I thank the God I know to be, for Christ is the conqueror of my soul. Since His the sway of circumstance, I would not wince nor cry aloud under the rule which men call chance. My head with joy is humbly bowed. Beyond this place of sin and tears, that life with Him and His the aid, despite the menace of the years, keeps and shall keep me unafraid. I have no fear, though strait the gate. He cleared my punishment from the scroll. Christ is the master of my fate. Christ is the captain of my soul. There is only one place that a person can find peace upon leaving this life, and it's certainly not in atheism. The only place is in Christ.